This is Wide Angle with Ashok Vyas. This is Wide Angle with Ashok Vyas. I'm Ashok Vyas and this is Wide Angle with Ashok Vyas. Today, the range of our focus goes towards your heart. And it is your heart that speaks to people and then they resonate with your heart and it makes you feel good as well as others feel good about it. It is not so simple. Many of us feel that when we are in a situation to communicate and say something to audience bigger than just 2-3 friends, it always puts us in an awkward position. And there is someone who has helped millions of people through his YouTube videos, which are helping people day in and day out. And he has also trained heads of states as well as diplomats, corporate executives, beauty queens. The gentleman needs no introduction, someone whose books, foolproof presentations and media training A to Z has been on the best-selling sellers list. TJ Walker is with me in ITV studio. This is the way we welcome you with Namaskar.
Good to be with you.
How are you?
Fantastic. Good to be with you.
So you have appeared on various television channels, be it Fox, CNN, whatnot, and there is a difference when you are connecting with your audience through a camera or when you are facing them live. So how has been it different for you while you were conducting workshops for executives or for students, or while you are sitting like right now with me?
Well, the biggest difference between speaking to the media versus a live audience is when you're talking to a reporter, you can have your comments edited out. You might talk to a reporter for 10 minutes, an hour, a day, and maybe just 10 words get in the final story. And if you're not trained the right way, you may find that the 10 words a reporter might use are the worst ones you could possibly want, and you're thinking, oh, I look like an idiot. Why do they use that? So I teach people how to know in advance what quotes will be used. So, and there are certain things that are unique to television. For example, everyone says you should look relaxed and comfortable on TV. Well, if I sit back relaxed, I look horrible. You see a big belly, you see 3 chins, so everybody has an ego. Nobody wants to look awful. So you don't sit like this. Now, some people will sit up perfectly straight. Hi, my name is TJ Walker. I help people look relaxed and comfortable on TV. I look ridiculous. On TV, you have to hold yourself up high. You have to lean forward about 15 degrees into the camera. Now you don't see 3 chins, ideally. Now you don't see a big gut. So everyone's heard that the camera puts 20 pounds on you. It will if you sit back and you just look your worst that way. Everyone does. You have to hold yourself high, lean forward 15 degrees. So there are certain things very, very specific to talking to the media and television. There are other things that are specific to talking to live audiences. And now everybody at some level has a little bit of nervousness before speaking to an audience. And maybe they're comfortable talking to 5 colleagues Monday morning at their staff meeting. But if they have to speak to 30 people at the board of directors meeting once a quarter, that makes them nervous. Maybe they're comfortable there, but if they have to speak to 500 people at a trade association meeting once a year, that's what makes them nervous. So everybody has some level of discomfort with speaking. And what I do is help make them comfortable so they know how they're coming across their very best, regardless of the audience, the size, the venue.
We all want to look good and we want to do the best that we can. In order to do that, as a speaker, there are certain traits which are definitely helpful for one and all. And who else can tell us more about it than TJ Walker, who has worked with the head of the states, as I mentioned earlier, and I find that very impressive. Someone who is taking care of the whole nation. If he's sitting with TJ Walker, what is it that probably he might have or she might have on the top of his or her head?
Well, if you are the president of a country or the head of state, Part of your concern is everything you say will be analyzed, scrutinized, looked at. Your enemies are looking at it. Journalists are peering through it. So you're really worried about any one word causing a problem, getting people upset. I mean, if you're the president of the United States or a major country, you could cause an international war, an incident with one wrong word. You could destroy an economy with one wrong word. So there's a tremendous amount of scrutiny, and they have to learn how to speak in a comfortable, relaxed way, even when they're giving 8 different speeches a day. And that quite often involves a teleprompter. For most people, that's not the problem. If you and I give a speech, or most of your audience members give speeches, if they're heads of companies, in sales departments, teachers, the big problem for most of us is not that someone's analyzing every single word, looking for some mistake. The number one problem most of us have when we give a speech is we stand up, we give the speech, we go through all the pages or the PowerPoint deck, everything goes smoothly, we sit down, and if you went around the room and put a $1,000 bill in front of everyone and said, you get to keep that money if you can name 2 things that speaker just said. In most cases, you'd never have to give away any money. Because the problem most of us have is that nobody can remember our speech because we were so boring. We just did a boring data dump. And that's the big problem. It doesn't matter if you're a head of state, doesn't matter if you are a 21-year-old on your first day at your new job. If you just give a data dump, people are not going to remember what you said. It's going to be boring. The number one difference between great speakers and average ones and awful ones is that great speakers illustrate every single important point with a story. All a story is a conversation that you had with a real person about a real problem in a real place and how it was resolved. The number one characteristic among all average and awful speakers is they don't tell stories. They just throw out data points.
So you need to be a good storyteller in order to be a good speaker, and this reminds me of Bill Clinton, how wonderfully he interweaves various references, various stories, and then you are glued to what he's saying. If you heard his speeches many times, he say, listen to this. And when he's saying listen to this, you are already attentive. And so what would you say makes a speaker a great speaker? Indeed, storytelling is one. And I would say common sense tells us that having good command over language, of course, probably helps.
I'm going to challenge you on 2 areas.
Okay.
And don't mean to be disrespectful, but in my experience, people who are speaking, say English, for example, as a second language can often be better speakers than native-born speakers, because when you speak in a certain language as a second language, you have a smaller vocabulary. Great speakers use smaller words. Winston Churchill would pride himself being able to give a complicated speech on foreign policy only using 1- and 2-syllable words. So the smaller the words, the simpler the words you have, the better. The other area where I want to politely disagree is you don't have to be a great storyteller. You simply have to tell relevant stories that get your point across to your audience. Here's what I've found. Everybody tells stories. It's just that most people don't tell them when they're giving a so-called formal speech. But you bump into them in the hallway and you say, what happened to your weekend? They don't just say, well, at 9:02 I woke up, at 9:03 I had breakfast. They don't do a data dump, most people. They talk about the most interesting thing that happened to them that weekend. They tell a little story. You talk to a good friend over the phone, you tell a story about, you can't believe what this obnoxious guy said at this meeting, and then you recount the story. So all human beings are stories. The difference is most people tell themselves, oh, I'm now giving this formal presentation, I have to stand up here and go through the data. Here's a real secret for your audience. There's no such thing as a formal presentation. There's no such thing as a PowerPoint presentation. There's no such thing as a technical presentation or a financial presentation. There are only 2 types of presentations in the entire world. Do you know what they are?
No.
It's either good or it's bad. If you're an audience member, the only thing you're ever thinking about, if you're sitting there watching someone, you're thinking, this is interesting, this is useful, let me pay attention, maybe take notes. Or you're thinking, wow, this TJ guy, he's really boring. Let me pretend to take notes and let me check my email. That's the only thing that's ever going on in the mind of an audience member. So great speakers realize that. So they don't do all these things other people do when they tell themselves, oh, I'm giving a formal presentation, because that tends to just make you awful for the audience. So great speakers focus on their audience. How can I make this idea interesting for the audience? How can I connect with the audience? You mentioned Bill Clinton. Now, many of your audience members have seen him before, and he's great at many levels. You're right, he tells stories. He tries to illustrate every major point with a story. He's also really great with eye contact. If you've ever seen, he has a different approach to eye contact. Now, one of my trainers used to work with Bill Clinton on the campaign trail, not as his media coach, but just as a campaign aide. And it was re-election time back in late 95, early 96, after a long day of campaigning. And my guy Andy turns to the president. They're playing poker, their sleeves are rolled up, they've got a bottle of beer. Andy turns and says, Mr. President, you nailed that speech. How did you do it? You had 10,000 people in the palm of your hand. How did you do it? And the president turned and says, Andy, it's very simple. I didn't talk to 10,000 people today. I picked one person in the audience and I had a private one-on-one conversation with that person for a full thought. Then I went to another person in the audience and I had a private conversation with that person for a full thought. And then another person in the audience and a private conversation. Now you're only looking at the person for 4 or 5, maybe at most 6 seconds. And then you go to the next person. But when the president or anyone else is looking at you as the speaker, it forces you to pay attention.
This is Wide Angle with Ashok Vyas. This is Wide Angle with Ashok Vyas.
It's much more interesting. And that's different from what most speakers do, because most speakers are either, they're staring at the floor or their notes, the bottom 1%. There's the next 98.9%. They're doing something like the windshield wiper. They're going back and forth. They're never really looking at the audience. Or they're like the top of a water sprinkler. You don't feel a connection. But the top 0.1% of speakers do exactly what Bill Clinton did. They hold eye contact for a full thought before going to the next person.
Amazing. The way he simplified, if I call it a technique or the style of such wonderful, impressive speakers, it's phenomenal. It's amazing, and it's so interesting and absorbing. And it is interesting to see how someone evolves in one's life. Indeed, being a good speaker helps you, whatever you are doing. But when you were passing out from Duke University, was this as a career that you already walked out with from your university, or it was something that you picked up on your way?
I had a strong, strong passion for speaking, media, and politics before college, back in junior high school. So this was a lifelong passion for me, and it is something that helps people throughout their whole life, because many of your viewers have seen various experts talk about the keys to success. And one person will say, it's my belief in family. And another expert may have never had a family, and they're just as successful. One expert will say, it's my belief in God is why I'm successful. And then you have someone like a Ted Turner, very successful billionaire media mogul, who's an atheist. You have some people say, it's Ben Franklin, it's about being early to bed and early to rise. And then you have Winston Churchill, who's sleeping till noon. I would contend the only thing that is remarkably consistent among amazingly successful people, they know how to speak well. And because of that, they can convince other people to follow them to do what they want. And that's what, to me, is so fascinating about it. It really is the only thing that is amazingly consistent among wildly successful people. They are good at communicating their ideas by speaking to people.
You can communicate ideas effectively only if you are clear about what is it that you are trying to convey. And so that involves clear thinking also. So somewhere while you are coaching or training or working through your workshops with students or executives, do you also talk about the thinking process, or there is something out of the orbit of your training?
No, it's always, all good speaking is always about style and substance. If you have the greatest style in the world and good eye contact and good hand gestures, but there's no substance, you didn't accomplish anything. You always have to have both. So much of being a good speaker has nothing to do with your voice, your diction, your posture, any of that. It's about being a better editor. The problem most people have is they don't use enough judgment about what to say in a speech. So they just say everything. They cover everything they could possibly say about their industry, their company, about what happened in the last quarter. It's the number one mistake most people make. They try to convey way too many ideas, too many numbers, too many facts in a short period of time, and they end up communicating nothing. So much of being a good speaker is you've got to have the ability to edit down your number of key points. The first thing I ask everyone I work with is, think of the best speaker you've seen in the last year. Now, tell me every message point you remember from that speaker. Not their style, if they were funny or any of that, but substance, message points, facts, numbers. Tell me everything you remember. And sometimes they don't remember anything. And these are people who go to major conferences, see big name speakers. Sometimes they remember 1 point, 2, occasionally 3. Every few months, somebody will remember 4 points. About once every 6 months, someone will remember 5 ideas from the best speaker they've seen in the last year, decade, even their lifetime. In all the years I've asked that question of thousands of people, I've never had anyone remember more than 5 ideas from the best speaker they've seen in years. So I start off with all of my clients saying, write down every major point that you want to convey in this speech, put them in priority. Anything that isn't in the top 5, take it and throw it in the trash. Because you're not going to be able to get people to remember that idea. And if you don't throw it in the trash, give it as an email. Email it to people. Give it in the traditional PowerPoint, where you email it to them before your speech, after your speech. In fact, I'm going to practice what I preach today. I've got all sorts of chapters in this book about presentation training. I'm not going to try to convey it to your audience, but I'll do this. I will email this book at no charge to your audience, no charge, and then they can get the chapters on teleprompter and stuff that we're not going to be able to go over today. I'll email them this book. All they have to do is email me, tj@tjwalker.com.
So tj@tjwalker.com very effectively shared this important message with you, which is useful and which is a practical way to get in-depth knowledge from this wonderful trainer, if I use that word, guru, of how to speak well. Now, your speaking assignment or the role of helping people speak better has also taken you to India, and you worked with guys working at Infosys in Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi, etc. Share with me how different it is while you interact with people who are not Americans, so to say, because you have worked most of the time in America. Was there any difference, important difference in terms of their ability to perceive and appreciate what you were trying to convey?
There were a lot of similarities, but there was one big difference when I was working in India. By the way, I loved India. I'd certainly love to come back. If any of you have organizations there who need presentation training or media training, I'd love to go back. Nothing but great experiences there. I love Indian food, so just being selfish, I'd love to go back. The big problems most people have is they're unsure about how they're coming across. They're not sure people understand them. They're not quite sure their PowerPoint presentations make sense. So that part is amazingly similar. The people in India versus the United States versus Western Europe versus the Middle East, and I work in all of those places. But I'll tell you, there's one difference I did find. When I finish a day of training in the United States or Western Europe, people are physically exhausted. They're like, because it's emotionally draining. I've gotten them up on camera typically 8-10 times in a day. So they're physically exhausted, they're emotionally drained, and they just want to collapse or go have a beer. When I was training in Bangalore at Emphasis, after we finished a long, grueling 8-hour day, the people finished, pulled out their laptop, stayed there, and worked another 8 hours right there. The work ethic was tremendous, unlike I've ever seen. But the good news is, people in India, people anywhere in the world, people in Pakistan, you name it, can all be great speakers. People have this mistaken notion that speaking is a skill people have in another country. A lot of people in the United States think that, oh, the British, they're the good speakers. And some people in Africa or in South America say, oh, the Americans, you're just naturally born speakers. I find in every culture, people feel like their own culture is not very good at public speaking and that some other culture has a monopoly on great speaking. And I'm here to tell you that is not the case. In most cultures in the world, most people are awful speakers. Most people are boring. Most people do data dumps. Most people fear speaking, and most people think they aren't very good. It really is a relatively rare skill to have, and it's rare to perceive yourself as a good speaker. But the good news is anyone can learn to be a good speaker. It is not something you're born with. It is completely an acquired skill. And it doesn't matter what your position was in life. It doesn't matter your economic status. It doesn't matter where you are at any point in your life. John F. Kennedy was considered a horrible speaker when he was a member of Congress, when he was in his late 30s. He was not considered a good speaker at all. Do you know what Martin Luther King Jr. and Rush Limbaugh have in common? Now, they both went on to great fame and fortune and influence speaking. Rush Limbaugh on radio, Martin Luther King Jr. in speeches, I Have a Dream speech. But the thing people don't realize that they have in common, both men took a public speaking course in college. They both got the grade of C, average, not an A, not a B, but a C, completely average. And they both went on to huge, huge influence and prominence as spoken communicators. So it's something, not only is it something you can learn, it's something you can learn at any age in life.
There's no need to be nervous about public speaking, and there are simple steps shared by TJ Walker. You can find out more about him through his YouTube channel, and he has also generously offered, if there is any question that you want him to address, you can email it to him. And as I mentioned earlier, he has trained people across the world, especially in America and many cities in India, and has appeared in major television networks. And today happens to be the first time that we have him here at ITV, and wonderful tips you have shared. Wishing you more and more successful connectivity with your audience, and may they learn things that help them do the best in their lives.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So that was TJ Walker, and walking with a wonderful message, feeling excited and elated that each and everyone has the potential to become the dream speaker that you want to be. This is Ashok Vyas. This is Wide Angle with Ashok Vyas.